Rain came down in hard slanting sheets, turning the forest edge into a black curtain that swallowed flashlights whole. And the only bright things left in the world were the swinging cones of searchlights and the wet, silver shine of a police dog's harness as he pulled forward with steady, disciplined purpose. The radio chatter was a distant buzz under the storm. But the handler, Officer Mason Reed, a veteran with a face carved by too many long nights, kept his voice low and clean, the way you talk when panic wants to climb into your throat and you refuse to let it. Because tonight was already bad enough. A missing child, a town holding its breath, and a K9 named Titan threading a scent through mud like it was a line of fate. "Track," Reed murmured, palm hovering near the leash without yanking, trusting the dog's nose the way a sailor trusts stars. And Titan moved with coiled certainty, paws silent on soaked leaves, head down, tail level, every muscle saying the same thing. "There is a path, and I will take you to it." Behind them, officers in ponchos and reflective vests fanned out, boots squelching, their lights bouncing off tree trunks and hanging fog, and someone, too young, too green, whispered the title like it was a superstition trying to ward off the dark. Police dog suddenly stopped search to protect little girl. What officers found nearby was terrifying. Reed didn't answer. He didn't waste breath on fear-shaped words. The woods answered anyway. Titan's pace changed, just a fraction at first, as if the air itself had thickened. His ears flicked forward, then back, reading something the humans couldn't hear, and Reed felt the leash go from a guiding pull to a locked bar of tension. "What is it, boy?" Reed breathed, eyes scanning the trees, the wet undergrowth, the glinting puddles that held the searchlights like broken mirrors. Titan stopped. Not a slow pause, a hard, absolute freeze, like a statue dropped into the mud. Then his head snapped to the right so fast the harness straps creaked, and before Reed could give a second command, Titan made a choice that turned the whole search upside down. He stepped off the track, shoulder-checking the leash angle, and moved. Quiet, fast, deliberate, toward the narrow trail that cut between two cedar trunks. "Titan, heel," Reed commanded, the first sharp edge in his voice all night. Because a trained K9 does not break a working track unless something is wrong, unless something is louder than scent and more urgent than obedience. Titan didn't disobey out of chaos. He disobeyed with purpose. He reached the trail bend and stopped again, but this time he planted himself sideways like a living shield, and in the sweep of Reed's flashlight beam, the reason hit them all at once. A little girl stood there, soaked to the skin, hair plastered to her cheeks, hands curled tight at her chest like she was holding herself together by force. She looked too small to be alone in the woods, too still, like she'd been told not to move, like she'd learned the kind of silence that keeps you safe. "Oh my God," someone behind Reed choked out. Reed surged forward, heart slamming. But Titan lifted his head and let out a sound Reed had only heard in training scenarios meant for worst-case nights. A low, professional growl. Not wild, not frantic, but measured, vibrating through the rain like a warning siren only predators could understand. Titan's eyes weren't on the girl. They were locked on something just off the path, half hidden under a tangle of ferns where the ground dipped into a shallow ditch. The growl deepened. Reed followed the line of Titan's stare, and the beam of his flashlight caught a detail that didn't belong in any forest. A strip of blue fabric snagged on a thorn, stretched tight as if it had been yanked away. And beside it, a fresh scuff mark in the mud. Wide, heavy, mechanical, leading toward a dark shape under a tarp that glistened with rain. The team closed in without meaning to. A single organism pulled by the dog's certainty. And as the wind shifted, it carried a new smell. Chemical, cold, wrong, making every officer's spine tighten at the same time. Reed swallowed, forcing calm into his lungs, and knelt beside the girl without crossing Titan's protective line. "Sweetheart," he said softly, voice gentler than the storm. "You're safe now." The girl's eyes flicked to the tarp and back, terror flashing like lightning, and she whispered something so small it almost vanished into the rain. "They said, don't look." Titan growled again, 1 inch louder, and the entire line of officers went silent. Because in that wet, shaking darkness, the dog wasn't just protecting a child anymore. He was pointing at the truth. 8 hours earlier, the same sky had hung low and gray over Briar Hollow, like a lid pressed gently but firmly on a simmering pot. And the town moved through its routines with the practiced ease of people who believed tomorrow would look like today. Coffee steaming in diner windows, a slow line at the bait shop, kids in hoodies cutting across the square on their way home, while the wind carried the smell of damp earth and distant pine. That clean, ordinary scent that makes you trust your own life. Little Maribel Haynes walked the sidewalk with a careful, measured stride that made her look older than 8. Her blue sweatshirt sleeves pulled down over her knuckles as if the fabric could protect her from more than cold. And she held a brown paper bag tight against her ribs, chin up, eyes forward. The kind of stubborn dignity you see in a child who's learned not to ask for too much from the world. She nodded politely to Miss Weller at the library steps, refused help with the bag even when the paper threatened to tear, and said, "I'm okay," in that soft voice that always sounded like it was trying not to bother anyone, which made the adults in Briar Hollow smile and ache at the same time. Across town, behind the sheriff's annex, Officer Mason Reed checked Titan's gear with ritual precision. Strap, buckle, reflective patch, leash clip. Because in Reed's world, details weren't habits, they were survival. And Titan stood perfectly still on the concrete pad, ears relaxed, eyes alert, breathing steady, the picture of controlled power. People called Titan a police dog. Like that was the whole story, but the truth was Titan was a system. Discipline, instinct, loyalty, and a kind of intelligence that felt almost unfair when you watched him work. He'd found a missing hiker in whiteout conditions 2 winters ago when the search grid had already started to collapse. He'd located a discarded weapon under a porch that 3 deputies had walked past twice. He'd tracked a suspect through a crowded county fair without once losing the scent trail. And the word around town had hardened into a simple phrase people repeated like a fact of nature. Titan doesn't miss. Reed never bragged about it. He didn't have that kind of ego. He had the calm of a man who'd seen what happens when pride outruns preparation, and he treated Titan like a partner, not a tool, speaking in short commands and quieter praise. Because Titan responded to respect the way some men responded to fear. "Easy," Reed murmured, as Titan shifted his weight, sensing the day's weather change before any human did. And Reed scratched behind the dog's ear in the one place Titan tolerated affection while on duty. "We'll keep it simple today." It was supposed to be a simple day. Community safety presence at the small fall fundraiser on the green, a patrol loop, maybe a paperwork catch-up if the radio stayed quiet. And that was exactly how Briar Hollow liked it. Small, predictable, tidy. But in the diner, a conversation cut off when Reed stepped inside for his usual black coffee, and he caught the way 2 men at the counter glanced at each other with the quick, secretive timing of people sharing a private worry. Outside, a delivery van idled too long near the community center with no markings on the side, then rolled away as soon as a cruiser passed. And at the edge of the parking lot, Maribel paused, staring at a posted flyer that promised progress and revitalization for Briar Hollow in bold print, her brow knitting as if she could feel something shifting beneath those cheerful words. Reed noticed her lingering and the way she held herself, brave but braced, so he offered a small smile, the kind that didn't demand anything from a child. "You doing all right, kiddo?" he asked, not crowding her space. Maribel looked up, met his eyes, and nodded once, firm. "Yes, sir," she said, voice gentle but steady, and then her gaze flicked past him for a heartbeat, just one, like she'd heard footsteps that weren't there. Titan at Reed's side did something subtle. His ears lifted, his nose tested the air, and his body angled half a step. Not aggressive, just aware. Reed felt it too. That invisible pressure that sometimes comes before trouble. Like the world taking a breath it doesn't plan to give back. The town kept moving, the fundraiser banners fluttered, the gray sky held, and nobody in Briar Hollow knew yet that by nightfall, Titan's reputation would be the only thing standing between one little girl and whatever was waiting in the trees. By late afternoon, the fundraiser on the green had gathered the whole town in one place, like a staged postcard. Folding tables lined with pies under clear plastic domes, chili simmering in slow cookers, raffle tickets snapping in the breeze, and kids weaving between adults with sticky hands and bright cheeks. While the gray sky pressed closer and the wind worried at the banners that read, "Bringing Briar Hollow Forward." And if you listened hard enough beneath the small talk, you could hear an undercurrent of something sharper, a nervousness that didn't match the wholesome decorations. Maribel Haynes stood near the edge of the crowd with her blue sweatshirt hood half up, clutching a cup of cocoa she'd been given for free by a woman who looked at her like she was everyone's little sister. And she kept her shoulders squared the way she always did, as if dignity could be practiced like handwriting. She watched the raffle drawing with polite attention, but her eyes kept drifting to the tree line beyond the baseball field where the grass gave way to woods. And each time the wind shifted, she pulled her sleeves down tighter over her hands. Officer Mason Reed was doing a slow loop around the perimeter with Titan at heel, offering nods and brief smiles, accepting thanks without soaking in it, because a veteran learns the difference between community comfort and community denial. Titan moved like a metronome beside him, controlled, steady, scanning, nose sampling the air in small, efficient pulls. And whenever a child ran too close, Titan simply adjusted his stance. Calm as stone, eyes soft but alert. Reed paused near the community center entrance when the door swung open and the little brass chime above it sang, a bright, innocent sound that somehow felt too sharp under the heavy clouds. And Maribel flinched like she'd been tapped on the shoulder by something unseen. She turned her head quickly, looking over her shoulder toward the doorway. And for a second her expression tightened into something older than fear. Recognition. Reed saw it and felt a cold pinch behind his ribs. The chime rang again as a man stepped out of the building, and there was nothing about him that would make a stranger alarmed. Clean jacket, neat hair, a friendly half smile. Except his eyes didn't smile at all, and he moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the air in front of him. Another man drifted behind him, wider in the shoulders, hands in his pockets, scanning the green with a bored, predatory patience, and the space around them subtly changed. Conversation faltered, laughter thinned, and people made room without deciding to, like iron filings pulled by a magnet. Maribel's grip tightened on the cocoa cup until the lid creaked. Reed opened his mouth to ask if she needed help, but she had already started walking, quick, purposeful steps, toward the convenience store across the street, the one everyone used like a second kitchen, its windows fogged with warmth and the smell of frying oil. "Titan?" Reed murmured, more to steady himself than the dog, and Titan's ears lifted, gaze tracking Maribel for a beat before returning to the two men. as if Titan had just identified the loudest risk. The street was busy with parked trucks and people crossing in loose clusters, and Maribel threaded between them like she'd done it 100 times, head down, blue sweatshirt hood up. And for a moment, Reed told himself she was just going to buy something. Just a normal kid doing a normal thing. The convenience store door chimed as she went in, that same bright note. And Reed watched through the glass as she reached for the candy rack near the counter, standing on her toes. Then the chime rang again. A third figure entered, hood up, posture angled, face hidden by the brim of a cap, and Maribel's head snapped toward the reflection in the window instead of the person directly. A small survival trick that punched Reed in the gut, because children don't learn that unless they've had to. Someone stepped too close behind her, close enough that the air between them disappeared, and Maribel's shoulders went rigid. Reed took one step off the curb. Titan's body tensed. Inside, the clerk glanced up, then down, then up again. And Reed saw the flicker of calculation, fear, yes, but also something like instruction being followed. The man at the back of the store reached for something low near the floor, maybe a dropped item, maybe a bag, and Maribel's blue sleeve flashed as she turned, as if to move away, as if to call out, as if to run. The door chime rang once more, sharp as a cut. And then she was gone. Not stumbling out, not crying, not visible behind the aisles. 1 second a little girl stood by the counter in a blue sweatshirt, and the next, the space where she'd been looked empty, as if the store had swallowed her whole. Reed's pulse surged as he crossed the street too fast for it to look casual. And outside on the green, panic started to ripple. But it rippled unevenly. Some people went pale and started shouting her name with real terror, cracking their voices, while others froze in place, eyes darting not toward the store, but toward each other, toward the community center, toward the road leading out of town, as if measuring what this would cost them. Reed hit the store door, the chime ringing like an alarm now, and Titan surged in at his side, nose already working, because whatever just happened in plain sight wasn't random. It was targeted. And the town's fear, staged or not, suddenly had a center. The first 5 minutes after a child disappears are always the loudest and the least useful. And in Briar Hollow, they became a storm of human noise that tried to drown out the only thing that mattered: the truth in the ground. Deputies poured into the convenience store in a rush of wet jackets and raised voices. Someone barked for an Amber Alert before anyone had even confirmed which direction she'd gone. Another officer started waving people away from the entrance while still letting half the fundraiser crowd cluster at the windows, phones up, recording, crying, speculating, and the clerk, hands trembling, kept saying, "I didn't see, I didn't see," like a prayer he hoped would protect him from consequences. Mason Reed stepped into that chaos and didn't raise his voice to match it. He let the room's panic wash past him like river water around a rock, because fear spreads fast, and his job, his real job, was to be the dam. "Everybody out," he said, calm as a locked door. Not shouting, not pleading, just stating it like the world would obey because it had to. "Clear the aisles. No one touches anything. Deputy knocks. Perimeter outside. Now. 2 units to the back lot. Keep civilians off the sidewalk." A couple of deputies blinked as if surprised someone had finally decided who was in charge. Then they moved, relief and embarrassment tangled together. Because a veteran's composure is contagious when it's this clean. Reed knelt near the candy rack where Maribel had been last seen, eyes scanning like a camera. Scuff marks in the thin grit by the door. A damp footprint near the mat that didn't match any police boot, a smear of mud on the baseboard, as if something had been dragged or hurried past. He didn't need to guess the story yet. He needed to preserve it. "Titan," he murmured, unclipping the working line with a careful hand, giving the dog space to think. and Titan's entire posture changed. No longer polite public appearance K9, but mission mode, head dropping, nose sweeping low in tight arcs, muscles tightening under his coat like cable. Reed watched people as much as the floor. A woman from the fundraiser kept talking too loudly. Maybe she ran off. Kids do that. And Reed noted it, the way you note a flicker in a suspect's eyes. The clerk's gaze kept darting toward the back hallway as if a string were tied there and tugging him. The door chime rang every time someone moved, a bright, mocking sound that made the moment feel looped, like they were all trapped inside the same second. "Sir," a deputy started, "we should—" Reed cut him off with the gentlest kind of authority. "We will, but not before we know what we're chasing." He pointed without looking up. "Tape that aisle. Get me the store cameras. And somebody find out who the unmarked van belongs to, because I saw it parked near the center." The deputy's eyes widened at that last part, realizing Reed had been watching even before the world broke. Titan inhaled, paused, then snapped his head toward the cooler section. Reed's breath hitched, and the dog moved, slow and deliberate, into the narrow lane between shelves, nose hovering over the tile where a faint wet trace cut across like a ghost line. Reed followed, not stepping where Titan stepped, letting the dog paint the map. Titan stopped at the back hallway door and pressed his nose to the bottom seam, then exhaled a sharp huff, the canine equivalent of certainty. The hallway led to a storage room and a rear exit that opened onto a gravel lot behind the building, where delivery trucks sometimes parked. Outside, the perimeter was a mess. 2 deputies arguing about which street to block, civilians drifting past the tape, someone's cousin insisting he needed to help look while standing in the exact spot that would contaminate footprints. And Reed's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in focus. "Knox," he called, voice steady enough to cut through drizzle and adrenaline. "Lock it down. 1 entry point, 1 exit, no exceptions." He pointed to the gravel where tire tracks were fresh, darker than the rest, and he watched a deputy start to step right onto them like it was nothing. "Stop," Reed said, and the deputy froze mid-step, realizing his mistake with a flush of shame. Reed crouched at the tracks, eyes narrowing. A wider tread, heavier vehicle, turned hard like it left in a hurry. Titan's nose dropped to the gravel, then swung toward the tree line at the back of the lot where brush met service road. The dog pulled forward with coiled purpose, leash line tightening like a drawn bow. And Reed rose with him, one hand firm, one hand open, voice calm as ever. Because the town could afford panic later. But right now, it needed a protector who could read a battlefield without blinking. The trail Titan found didn't look dramatic to a casual eye. Just a thin thread of disturbed gravel leading to the service road and then into the slick edge of town where the pavement gave up and the woods began. But to Reed, it was a neon arrow. Because urgency leaves signatures. The hard turn in the tire tracks, the scattered pebbles kicked wide, the single torn corner of a receipt pasted to wet mud like an accidental breadcrumb. Titan pulled forward with steady insistence, nose low, harness straps dark with rain. And Reed matched him stride for stride while deputies jogged behind, radios crackling with overlapping updates that didn't agree with each other. "We've got possible sighting near Maple," one voice said. "No, negative, that was a different kid," another corrected. "Do we call state?" someone asked. And the question hung in the air like a flare. Reed didn't answer yet. He was listening to the land, the dog, the pattern. They rounded the last row of buildings, and the service road opened into a stretch of scrub and pine that bordered the old industrial tract, Briar Hollow's future, according to the glossy flyers, where signs warned No trespassing in fresh red paint that looked almost new against the weathered posts. Titan's body angled toward that tract without hesitation, as if the scent line ran straight through the warnings and dared anyone to argue. Reed's jaw tightened. He'd expected this. The town had places it didn't want eyes on, places people pretended were empty even when the lights were on at night. He raised his radio. Command, K9 has direction of travel toward the North Tract, requesting units to secure access points and notify state. This is a child abduction until proven otherwise. The radio hissed. Then a different voice cut in, smooth, familiar, too cheerful for the moment. Mason, hold up there. Sheriff Colton Voss. Reed stopped because you stop when the top voice in your chain of command speaks, but he didn't slack the line. Titan stayed forward, muscles tight, like a compass needle insisting on north. Voss's cruiser rolled up spitting mud, and the sheriff climbed out in his tan hat and raincoat, with the practiced, folksy air that usually calmed town meetings and smoothed over disputes about fences and noise complaints. Tonight, it felt like a costume. We don't need to turn this into a circus, Voss said, walking up with hands open as if offering reason. It's a small town. Kids wander. We'll find her. But we're not storming onto private property over a hunch. Reed met his eyes and saw something behind the friendly veneer. Pressure, calculation, a quiet directive. This isn't a hunch, Reed replied, voice level. Titan's tracking. Tire tracks head this way. The scent line doesn't care who owns the land. Voss chuckled, soft and dismissive, as if Reed had told an overzealous joke. That tract is sensitive, he said. There are liability issues, ongoing development negotiations. We can't have deputies tromping around and stirring up trouble. Besides, he added, lowering his voice as if sharing wisdom, we don't need outsiders. State police roll in, news follows. Folks start asking questions that don't help anyone. Reed felt the words for what they were. Not guidance, but containment. He kept his face still because showing anger would be giving Voss leverage. A child is missing, Reed said. That's the only question that matters. Voss's smile tightened by a fraction. And we'll handle it, he replied, drawing the line with that one word, we, as if the child belonged to the department, not to herself, not to her family. He glanced at Titan like the dog was an inconvenience. Call off the track. Focus on the neighborhoods. Search the creek. We'll canvass. Keep it clean. Behind Voss, a couple of deputies shifted, eyes bouncing between Reed and the sheriff, waiting to see which gravity they'd obey. Reed heard the subtext now as clearly as a siren. There are places you are not allowed to look, and it's not because of safety. It's because someone powerful told Voss not to let anyone see what's there. Titan gave a low, impatient whine, the smallest betrayal of his discipline, as if the dog could taste the delay. Reed looked past the sheriff to the red "No Trespassing" sign and the dark line of trees beyond it. And he imagined Maribel's small hands in the rain, her blue sleeves soaked through, her stubborn dignity trying to hold her upright while adults argued about property lines. His voice stayed calm, but colder now. Sir, Reed said, with respect, if we lose time because we were worried about liability, we won't get it back. Voss's eyes hardened under the brim of his hat. That's an order, Mason. The rain seemed to thicken, drumming on hoods and shoulders, and for a beat, the world held its breath. Reed nodded once, because outright defiance would get him yanked off the scene and Titan caged, and that would be exactly what containment wanted. Understood, he said, the words tasting like rust. Then he stepped back, appearing to comply, while his mind moved fast and quiet. If the sheriff was blocking the North Tract, then the answer wasn't just in the woods. It was in whoever had the power to make the sheriff afraid of looking. Titan stood at Reed's side, still pointed toward the forbidden trees, and Reed rested a steadying hand on the dog's shoulder as if to say, "I hear you. I'm not done." Reed played the obedient soldier for exactly as long as it took Voss to turn his back and start issuing loud, performative instructions to the other deputies. "Check the creek line, sweep the neighborhoods, talk to the parents." The kind of busy work that looked like action to a frightened town, but bled time like an open wound. And Reed watched the choreography with a veteran's eye. Who followed immediately, who hesitated, who looked relieved to be told to look anywhere but north. Then, with the rain masking small movements and Titan's body already coiled toward the truth, Reed angled his team accidentally wide on the way to the creek, looping through a service cut that skirted the edge of the restricted tract. A strip of land where old fencing leaned like tired men and scrub pine grew in stubborn clusters. And Titan's nose snapped down so hard it was as if the scent had punched him. The leash went taut. Titan pulled. Not frantic, focused, urgent, a locomotive choosing its track. "Easy," Reed whispered, just loud enough for the deputies behind him to hear it as routine, while his eyes took in the terrain, a narrow side path worn into the grass that wasn't on any official map, hidden behind a sagging chain-link panel that had been bent back and retied with fresh zip ties, the plastic still bright against the rust. The air changed as soon as they stepped onto that path. Reed felt it in his throat before he fully registered it with his mind. Oil, hot metal cooling, and something damp and rotten that didn't belong to rain or forest, like the breath from a closed room that shouldn't have been opened. Titan's ears flattened for a second, then lifted again, and he surged forward, dragging Reed toward the path's end where the trees parted to reveal an old utility building squatting at the edge of town like a forgotten scar. Concrete walls stained with age, a corrugated door half-crooked on its tracks, faded warning stickers, and a security light that flickered even though the sky still held daylight. "We're not supposed to be here," Deputy Knox muttered, glancing back over his shoulder as if Sheriff Voss might appear out of the rain like an accusation. Reed didn't answer with words. He answered by dropping his gaze to the mud near the path entrance, where tire tracks cut through like fresh scars. Wide tread, deep impression, water still pooling in the grooves because it hadn't had time to fill and blur. Fresh, Reed thought, and his stomach tightened, because this rain had been steady for hours. Anything older would have softened. Something had driven through recently, heavy enough to bite into wet earth and heavy enough to carry more than groceries. Titan pulled them closer to the building, nose sweeping along the base like a scanner, and Reed spotted another tiny detail that made his pulse spike. A strip of bright blue fiber caught on a snagged nail at knee height, trembling in the wind like a small flag of surrender. Blue like Maribel's sweatshirt sleeves. Reed reached out, but stopped short of touching it. Not yet. Not without documenting. Instead, he raised his phone, snapped a quick photo, and felt the cold click of decision settle in his chest. Then the bystanders arrived. Too fast, too coordinated to be coincidence. 3 men in work jackets and rain hats emerging from behind a parked generator as if they'd been waiting for the exact moment someone official got close. "Hey, hey," the tallest one called, smiling too wide, hands up in a friendly gesture that carried a warning underneath. "You can't go in there. Site's closed. Liability." Another one laughed, like this was all a misunderstanding. "Sheriff said keep folks out. We can help you look somewhere else. There's trails by the creek, you know." They moved subtly as they spoke. Not aggressive, but positioned, one drifting left, one right, forming a human gate between Reed and the building's side door. Titan stopped dead and stared at them, not barking, not lunging, just stillness so intense it felt like pressure on the skin. And a low rumble began in his chest, controlled and professional, a warning written in vibration. Reed kept his posture relaxed, shoulders down, voice even, but his eyes sharpened. "Appreciate it," he said, calm as glass. "Step aside. We're conducting an active search," and the tallest man's smile stayed in place while his eyes changed, sliding to Titan's teeth, then to Reed's badge, then back to the mud. "We're just trying to help," he repeated, and the words sounded rehearsed. Reed glanced past them and caught a glint near the building's rear. Something metallic and new bolted onto an old frame. A fresh padlock on a side hatch that had no reason to be locked on an abandoned utility shed. And beside it, another set of tire tracks crossing the first, overlapping like layers in a story someone hoped would never be read. Titan's nose snapped toward that hatch, pulling hard enough that Reed's arm jolted, and in that instant, Reed understood the real escalation. The dog hadn't just led them somewhere they weren't supposed to go. He'd led them to the place someone was actively guarding, in real time, while a child was missing. And that meant whatever was behind that door wasn't just evidence. It was the reason the town's fear felt staged. Reed didn't waste time arguing with men who showed up too quickly and smiled too hard. He simply shifted his stance so his body blocked their line of sight to Titan's working angle, then spoke into his radio in the most neutral tone he could manage. "K9 is indicating near the utility structure, possible scent confirmation," while his eyes measured distances like tape. The side hatch, the bent fence panel, the narrow cut in the brush that ran behind the building and disappeared toward the tree line like a back door made by people who didn't want witnesses. And Titan's leash pulsed with impatience, the dog's whole frame humming with the certainty of a solved puzzle. "Knox," Reed said quietly, not looking back. "Keep them talking. Don't touch them. Don't let them touch us." Knox swallowed but nodded, stepping forward with the stiff bravery of someone who knew he was underqualified for the moment, but refused to vanish. Reed turned with Titan as if they were simply checking the perimeter, angling around the building's rear where the rain hit harder and the smell intensified. Oil, metal, damp rot. And the ground turned from gravel to churned mud that clung to boots like accusation. Behind them, the men called after them, "Hey, you can't..." But their voices softened, careful not to sound like threats. And that carefulness told Reed everything. Titan pulled them down the narrow cut, a ribbon of trampled weeds running between sagging fence and thorny brush. And Reed felt the world narrow to the dog's shoulders, the leash line, and the sound of rain striking leaves in relentless percussion. The cut bent sharply left, and Titan rounded it first, then stopped so abruptly Reed almost collided with him, the leash snapping taut like a seatbelt. Titan's ears shot up. His body went rigid, every muscle locked in place as if he'd hit an invisible wall. Reed's heart lurched, because this was not the pause of confusion. This was the stop of recognition. "Titan?" he breathed, and the dog didn't glance back. Titan's head lifted, and his gaze fixed forward into a small clearing no bigger than a living room, where the brush opened around a narrow game trail that led toward the woods. And there, standing in the rain like a figure placed by a careless hand, was Maribel Haynes. She wasn't running. She wasn't crying loudly. She was just there, soaked through, hair plastered to her cheeks, shoulders trembling with a cold she didn't have time to feel. Her blue sweatshirt darkened nearly black with water, sleeves hanging heavy past her small hands. Her eyes were wide, but not wild. They held the stunned stillness of a child who has been told to be quiet and has obeyed because obedience felt like survival. For one heartbeat, Reed's mind tried to insist on relief. She's here, she's alive, but the placement of her body in that clearing, the way she stood exactly at the bend, as if waiting for someone to arrive, made the relief taste wrong. Titan moved before Reed did. Not forward toward her as a friendly greeting, but sideways. One decisive step that put his broad chest between Maribel and the direction of the utility building, between Maribel and the men behind them, between Maribel and whatever else the rain was hiding. He planted his paws like anchors and lowered his head. And the growl that rose from his throat was not the frantic sound of an animal out of control. It was a professional warning, deep and measured, vibrating through the wet air like a low siren. Reed raised a hand instinctively, palm out, telling the deputies behind him to stop without saying a word. "Easy," Reed murmured. But Titan wasn't calming down. He was calibrating, holding the line. Knox came up behind Reed, saw the little girl, and sucked in a sharp breath. "Maribel," he started. But Reed cut him off with a glance, because Titan's body language was screaming that this wasn't a reunion scene, this was a defensive posture. "Maribel," Reed said softly, voice gentle enough to be warmer than the rain. "It's okay. You're safe." Maribel's lips parted as if she wanted to answer, but her eyes flicked, not to Reed, not to Titan, but to the brush near the clearing's edge, and Reed followed that flicker like it was a flare in the dark. Titan's growl deepened by half a note, and Reed understood the terrifying math of the moment. The dog wasn't losing the trail. He wasn't confused. He wasn't tired. Titan had made a choice. The scent line might have continued deeper into the woods, toward the building, toward whoever had taken her. But Titan had stopped tracking because the most urgent mission had shifted from pursuit to protection, and that meant danger was not behind them in the past. It was near them, right now. Close enough that Titan was willing to break the logic of the search, to put himself between a little girl and whatever was waiting to move. Titan's growl didn't just warn, it directed, and Reed learned long ago to treat that sound like a compass, because the dog wasn't reacting to ghosts. He was reacting to facts the human senses were too slow to catch. The K9 held his body as a shield in front of Maribel, but his head turned in a smooth, deliberate arc toward the left edge of the clearing where the ground dipped and the brush thickened. And Reed followed the line of that gaze until his flashlight beam found the thing the rain couldn't wash away. A strip of dark plastic half buried under wet leaves, pulled taut over an unnatural shape like a blanket thrown over a crime. The beam caught a corner of it flapping in the wind, and beneath that corner something pale flashed, metal maybe, or the slick shine of a latch, before the tarp snapped back down. Knox shifted behind Reed, boots squelching, and Titan's growl sharpened instantly, the dog's head snapping back toward Knox as if to say, "Don't move wrong," and Knox froze mid-step, realizing Titan wasn't just guarding Maribel. Titan was controlling the scene like a professional, keeping everyone from stepping on evidence or into danger. Reed's hand rose again, palm down, a silent order to hold position. "Nobody goes in front of the dog," Reed said quietly, voice calm but absolute. "Not until we know what he's seeing." Maribel stood behind Titan's shoulder, trembling, her blue sleeves clinging to her hands like wet bandages, and when Reed glanced at her face, he saw something that tightened his chest. There were faint red marks at her wrist, not bruises yet, but the beginnings of them, like someone had gripped her too hard and then let go. Reed forced his expression to stay gentle as he spoke to her. "Sweetheart," he said, "can you tell me, did someone bring you here?" Maribel's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Her eyes flicked again toward the tarp, then down, then up, and she whispered, so small it was nearly stolen by the rain. "They said, 'Stand here. Don't run. Don't scream.'" Reed felt the words land like a weight, placed, like a marker, like bait. Titan's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, and for a second he glanced back at her with a softness that didn't dilute his warning. Then his gaze snapped forward again, unwavering. Reed edged to the side, not forward, not past Titan's line, just enough to widen his angle on the tarp area without contaminating the ground. His flashlight beam tracked the mud, and the scene began to assemble itself in details. Fresh scuffs where something heavy had been dragged. A broken padlock lying half submerged in a puddle as if it had been cut and tossed. Scratch marks in the wet soil leading to a low mound where the ground looked disturbed, the way it looks when something has been lifted and set back down in a hurry. Titan's head lowered slightly, nostrils flaring, and the growl became a steady vibration that filled the clearing, like a warning bell. Reed's stomach turned cold. This wasn't a kid wandering off. This was a site. Prepared, used, managed. He reached slowly for the small evidence flags in his kit, then stopped himself. Flags could wait. The priority was safety. "Knox," Reed said, still calm. "Get on the radio, quietly. Tell dispatch we have Maribel located, but we have suspicious materials in the North Tract. Request state immediately and EMS staged, and tell them not to route through the main road. Use the back service access." Knox nodded, fingers trembling as he keyed his mic, and the rain made it sound like the world was hissing back. Reed's eyes returned to the tarp. The plastic was pinned at one edge by a flat rock, and beside it, partially hidden under leaves, was a black duffel bag with its zipper half open. In the split second Reed's beam hit inside, he saw something that made his face harden. Child-sized sneakers, a small pink hair tie, and a folded hoodie that wasn't Maribel's. Items arranged too neatly to be lost, too curated to be accidental. A stash, a collection, a message. The kind of detail that turns a missing person call into something darker, something systematic. Then his beam slid farther, catching the glint of a phone lying face up in the mud near the duffel. Its screen still lit under a spiderweb of cracks, a tiny red dot pulsing in the corner, recording. Reed's pulse spiked. Someone had set it here like a witness that couldn't speak, or like a trophy meant to capture fear. Titan's growl deepened again as Reed's light crossed the phone, and Reed realized the dog wasn't only reacting to what they could see, he was reacting to what it meant. Reed's mind ran ahead, opening loops faster than he could close them. If the phone was recording, who was watching the live feed? Or who planned to retrieve it later? If Maribel was placed here, who moved her? And why leave her in a clearing where K9 lights would find her? Was it a mistake? Or was it staged to redirect the search away from the building? Reed swallowed, keeping his breathing even, because the smallest crack in composure would leak into everyone else. He crouched just enough to get a clearer look without stepping forward. Eyes narrowed at the mud around the tarp, and he saw the final detail that made the whole scene feel like a trap sprung halfway. A set of boot prints that stopped at the tarp's edge and then doubled back, fast, toward the utility building, as if whoever placed these things had been interrupted or spooked. One question was answered now with brutal clarity. Titan stopped because the girl needed protection right here. But two bigger questions opened like doors into darkness. Who had put Maribel in the clearing, and what, exactly, had they been hiding under that tarp before the rain? And a canine's instincts forced it into the light. Rain kept hammering the clearing as if the sky itself was trying to erase what they found, but the evidence sat there stubborn and undeniable. Tarp, duffel, broken lock, the phone still blinking red, and Reed felt the case tilt. the way a floor tilts just before you realize it isn't a floor at all, but a trap door. He kept his body between Maribel and the edge of the brush, speaking to her softly without moving closer than Titan allowed. "Stay behind him, okay? Don't go anywhere unless I tell you." And she nodded once, that same stubborn dignity holding her upright, even as her teeth chattered. Knox finished his whisper-urgent radio call and looked back at Reed with wide eyes, waiting for the cavalry. But instead, the radio spat a different voice. Sheriff Voss. Too calm, too controlled, like a man putting a lid on boiling water. "All units," Voss said. "Stand down on North Tract operations. Repeat, stand down. K9 unit, return to command point. This is an order." Reed stared at his radio like it had just spoken a lie, then he lifted his gaze to the tree line, because orders like that didn't come from concern. They came from fear of what the dog had sniffed out. "Negative," Reed replied carefully, choosing words like stepping stones over deep water. "We have the child located, and we have suspicious materials consistent with abduction. Requesting state response remains active." Silence crackled back. Then Voss's voice returned sharper, less folksy now. "Mason, do not turn this into something it isn't. Bring the dog back. Bring the kid back. We'll handle the rest." Handle the rest? Bury the rest, Reed thought, and his jaw tightened. A second voice broke in. Deputy Harlan, one of Voss's loyal men. "Reed, you're risking your career, man. Do what the sheriff says." Reed's eyes flicked to the phone in the mud, still recording. And he felt a cold certainty. Someone wanted this scene cleaned before outside eyes arrived. And every second that passed was a second they could be moving, deleting, rewriting. Hard cut, as if the world itself blinked. Inside the warm back room of the Briar Hollow Development Council, where rain tapped politely against tinted windows and the air smelled of expensive cologne over old wood, a man in a crisp suit leaned over a conference table scattered with site plans and glossy revitalization renderings. They called him Everett Klein in public with reverence and gratitude. Donor, visionary, builder of futures. But in this room, his smile was thin and utilitarian. The smile of a man who treated people like numbers. "I don't care what the dog found," Klein said, voice smooth as oil. "I care what gets seen." A younger aide hovered, pale, holding a tablet. "Sir, there's chatter, phones. People are posting." Klein cut him off with a raised finger. "Then you kill it," he said. "Delete footage. Buy silence. And if anyone thinks they're brave enough to talk, remind them what happens when they make trouble for progress." A woman at the far end, local official, hair perfect, swallowed. "And the sheriff?" she asked. Klein's gaze didn't even shift, because he already owned that answer. "Colton will contain it," he said. "He understands what he owes." The first domino of the countermove fell right there, in that dry room, while Reed stood in the rain. Hard cut back to the clearing. Headlights flashed through trees as a cruiser approached too fast, stopping short at the brush line, and Reed saw Voss's silhouette step out, hat brim low, posture rigid. "Mason," Voss called, not shouting yet, but close. "We're done here." Reed didn't move. Titan didn't move. The K9's stare had shifted, past the sheriff, past the deputies, into the darker timber beyond the clearing, where the rain turned shadows into moving curtains, and Titan's ears pricked forward as if he'd heard something no one else could. A breath that didn't match the wind, a footfall softened by mud, the electric hum of eyes watching from cover. Titan's growl faded into a different kind of warning, silent stillness, his head angled, gaze locked on one slice of darkness like it was a doorway. Reed followed that line and felt the hair rise on his neck. because it wasn't just evidence and orders now. It was presence. Someone unseen was out there, close enough that Titan could hear lies breathing, close enough to decide whether Maribel would stay found or disappear again. The first crack in the wall didn't come from Reed's badge or Titan's teeth. It came from a voice that had been ignored too many times, and it arrived through the radio in a whisper that wasn't meant for open air. "Officer Reed, it's Lena at dispatch," the young dispatcher said, breath tight like she'd been running without moving. "They told me to stop logging your updates, and Sheriff Voss just came in here personally and asked for the store footage to be handled. I copied it before he could." Reed's eyes narrowed, rain sliding off his lashes, because the word handled was always code for erased. And the fact Voss was physically in dispatch meant the containment was active and close. "Lena," Reed said, voice steady and low. "Listen carefully. Do you have the copy somewhere safe?" "Yes," she whispered. "I put it on a thumb drive, and I emailed a clip to my personal account. Just a short segment, the part where the hooded guy steps behind the girl and the clerk looks away on purpose. And I pulled the GPS ping from the unmarked van's fleet tracker because it's registered under Briar Hollow Utilities, even though it has no markings. The van was behind the old track building at 412. Then it stopped near the creek access at 419. And then it went dark." Reed felt the pieces click into place like a lock turning. A van with a municipal shell, a utility building that smelled alive despite being abandoned, a child placed like bait, and a sheriff trying to vacuum the whole thing into silence. "You did the right thing," Reed told her, and he meant it in a way that carried weight, because courage is fragile and needs reinforcement the moment it shows itself. Now you need to protect yourself. Do not give that drive to anyone local. Call state investigations directly. Use the emergency contact list. Tell them child abduction, evidence tampering, and a compromised chain of command. In the clearing, Titan's stare remained pinned to the darkness, his body still shielding Maribel. And Reed used that stillness as his anchor, while Voss moved closer, face hard, rain beading on his hat brim like cold sweat. "Mason," Voss warned, voice tight with controlled rage. "Walk away from this. You're standing in a career-ending mess." Reed didn't argue. He simply lifted his phone and began recording. Voss's face, the orders, the scene. Because if they wanted to erase truth, then truth needed mirrors. "Sheriff," Reed said, calm as a courtroom, "state is en route." The lie in that sentence was tactical, not moral. It bought time, and time was everything. Voss's eyes flicked just once toward the utility building cut, and that flicker was enough. Minutes later, the sound arrived through the rain like a promise. Engines, multiple, approaching fast but disciplined. And then headlights cut through trees in a clean formation that didn't look like Briar Hollow improvisation. State investigators stepped out in rain gear with the posture of people who didn't ask permission to do their jobs. And behind them, an internal affairs supervisor Reed recognized from an old case climbed from the passenger seat, face set like stone. "Officer Reed," she called, voice carrying authority the way thunder carries weather. "Step back and brief us." The temperature of the entire scene changed. Deputies who'd been leaning toward Voss now straightened, suddenly aware there were bigger consequences than local loyalty, and the men who'd just been trying to help near the utility building melted backward until a trooper pinned them with a flashlight and a simple command: "Hands where I can see them." Lena's proof did what proof always does. It turned whispers into warrants. And within an hour, the store footage was on a state laptop. The GPS data mapped in bright lines, and the utility building door was opened under lawful authority to reveal logs, access cards, and a hidden compartment that explained the smell of oil and rot without needing gore to make the point. Voss tried to talk his way out, tried to laugh it off with that folksy veneer. But the veneer cracked when the internal affairs supervisor played the audio of his stand-down order beside the timestamps of tampering, and the first domino fell. Cuffs on the sheriff in the rain, while townspeople watched from behind tape with hands over mouths. The second domino fell when the helpful men were identified as contractors, tied to Everett Klein's development arm. The third fell when Klein himself, summoned by his own arrogance, arrived in a dry coat and a confident smile, only to find state agents waiting, the clip of Maribel being boxed in on a screen, and Lena's thumb drive sitting like a small, unstoppable truth on the table. By dawn, Maribel was wrapped in blankets and warmth, her mother sobbing into her hair while Titan sat nearby like a silent guardian statue. And when Maribel finally reached out with a shaking hand to touch Titan's wet fur, the dog leaned in just enough to let her know the world still held something loyal. Later, the town would do what towns do after denial breaks. Repair the places that were used for harm, post apologies that weren't just paper. Vote out the people who'd smiled too wide and look each other in the eye when they said, "We should have seen it sooner." But the last image that lingered, the one that mattered, was simple. A veteran handler with a steady voice. A police dog who chose protection over pursuit, and a young dispatcher who proved that courage spreads, one honest action at a time.